Competitors have always had that conspiracy theory that series decide who does and who doesn't get penalties. But is that an actual thing that happens? Is it a problem? Let's get into it. Hello and welcome to Oakman on Racing. And today we've got two different sides of the same issue, if it's an issue at all. The question is, do race promoters and series owners interfere with officials making calls on the racetrack? And is it actually as big a problem as people like to say it is? Now, first off, series promoters and series owners have a massive job, and there is no racing without them. So let's get that out of the way. But the truth is that I have worked for series that have both indirectly and directly interfered with calls being made, whether it be on the racetrack in the moment or after the race when it comes to actually delivering a penalty that was written. So who does this? Now, it can be a club, it can be regional, it can be national, it can be international. It can happen anywhere, but obviously so can the good series. But how does the interference actually happen? Do they go out there and tell officials ahead of time, this guy's the sponsor, you can't penalize him, leave my kid alone, my buddy over there, just let him do what he's doing? Now, I reached out to a lot of different officials and I got a lot of different responses, and you're probably not surprised to find out that they were all very, very similar. And it usually comes down to three different categories. The first is a direct interference in a call. So the official is out on the racetrack, they make a call, and either over the radio or the person gets directly in their face and very publicly tells them to change their mind. Very often, the race director or steward or whoever made the call is made the bad guy. I mean, just imagine yourself as an official on the racetrack. You've made a call that you believe is right, only to get chewed out and told that, you're a bad person, you're a bad official, you're whatever the excuse is, and you're told that you're not allowed to do what you did. As a competitor, how would you react to a situation where you see an official has made a call? Maybe you saw it and you agreed with it, and then there's the owner or the promoter out there yelling at the official for having done it. It doesn't go well. It doesn't go well for anybody. Another way that interference can happen is the race director or steward is on the racetrack, the owner promoter comes in and basically takes it off the sheet, tells timing scoring, race control to remove the penalty, and it never gets handed out. Now, in larger series where the race director and the steward are not the same person, something like that is kind of more akin to the first one, where the interference is very clear, it's open, and, the steward's being told, no. Whatever the race director said, don't worry about it. Don't put it on the sheet. But in a lot of series, the race director and the steward is the exact same person, and they're going to be out on that racetrack. And if somebody interferes with race control, it is very often that they will have no idea that it happened. And with the race director as the steward, there's nobody actually double checking between races whether or not the penalties got applied properly when they go out on the sheet. You're relying on timing scoring to take care of that. Remember, in the last video, I talked about limited resources, which means you have to have your eyes and ears on the racetrack, looking in problem areas or, the most important areas during that race. And you don't have time to be looking down at a sheet, watching videos, checking the timing sheets. It doesn't work out. So if there isn't a separate individual who is directly responsible for that, or the person who is directly responsible for that can be influenced, that's a problem. And the third kind of interference is failing to follow through on a penalty. This is where the race official has to create some paperwork at the end of the day, after the race, that gets sent out to the individual who is getting the penalty. And the series is responsible for sending that along, and they simply don't. Now, in the case of a suspension, usually the race director is going to find out the next event when that person shows up, and they're told, no, that person's going to race. That's its own kind of problem. But if the race director isn't there the next race, or it's probation where there's no physical sign, the person is allowed to race, they're just racing under conditions. And when one of those conditions are breached, the race director tries to escalate that penalty to what the probation would be, and they find out that the person was never made aware that they were put under probation to begin with. Now, with these kind of penalties, by procedure, the person needs to be aware that they are racing under probation. You could make the argument that since the race director wrote it up, that the person is under probation the moment that it's been called, but really you need to have some kind of awareness. It goes back to my video on talking about how penalties have to be created where awareness is required. If there is no reasonable way that a person can be aware of a rule, it's not published in a rule book, it's not in a bulletin, it wasn't mentioned in the driver's meeting, then how can you possibly expect somebody to follow it? Well, the same thing goes for applying those kinds of penalties. If a person isn't aware that they're suspended, how are they going to know? Like, they're going to show up. It's just going to be a problem if they show up fully unaware. And the same thing goes for probation. If they're not aware that they're under probation, it can change their behavior. It's likely going to change how they approach a race. And you have to give them that opportunity. So if a promoter or series fails to pass on that information, then it completely undermines the call that the race director's steward has made. It's like it never happened. Now, clearly this kind of thing doesn't happen all the time. These are exceptions. And in fact, some of the people that I've spoken to refuse to deal with the series that the first time somebody came up and tried to interfere with their call, they left and refused to work with them again. There are other situations where it's more common, where essentially the race control team always looks to the owner or promoter for guidance when it comes to making calls. Now, those are the most problematic series, and usually you can tell who these series are because they're quite small. Everybody is aware that it is a biased series and they try to avoid it, but that's not always possible. If you're in an area that doesn't have a lot of options, or the options aren't great, maybe everybody has a problem with interference, then it stops becoming the main decision in where you go. Really, the most serious effects are essentially that it kills the legitimacy of the series. I mean, if you're an owner or promoter, you're doing all this work to try to build and grow your series, and then you make a decision like that directly undermines everything. Now, granted, the vast majority of business owners in motorsports kind of anywhere don't have an actual business education. They've inherited a thing that was already successful. Maybe they're figuring it out as they go along. Maybe they just have a good aptitude for it. It means that bad habits are easier to make, and you might not be aware of things like a bad customer that is costing you more money than they're making you, those kinds of things. Interfering in a process like that, especially publicly, it undermines the officials and de-incentivizes them to make any kind of call, let alone any kind of difficult call. It makes the competitors wary, makes them angry, makes them much more likely to undermine the series itself, makes them very susceptible to leave at the very first opportunity of something that looks to be a little bit better. It stifles growth. It's going to hurt the racing. You're going to have people who know they can get away with things becoming a problem over people who don't think that they're going to get that same kind of treatment. So you get very unbalanced racing. Really, there's just no benefit to it. Now, I have heard the justification directly that you got to take care of your sponsors. Without the sponsors, there are no series and stuff like that. And that is just nonsense. It's a lie. If the only reason somebody is interested in sponsoring your series is so that they get special treatment, you do not want their money. Do not accept it. They are going to cause you more problem than they're going to be a benefit. And beyond that, there have been many years where many series have survived a very long time with essentially the participants' fees and maybe a little bit here and there of, some stuff to give away, maybe trophies, things like that, class sponsors where it's literally somebody handing over $100, $200 to help supply something to that class. And growth happened. After the collapse in the 90s, it wasn't sponsors that brought the racing back. It was the desire to participate and bad people leaving racing. Not just bad customers, but bad promoters, bad club owners, bad board of directors people. The more selfish people left because there was no more money to be made. And then the people who wanted to be involved got to be the decision makers and have brought it up to what it is today. But those bad actors, those people who smell money, are back. And the more that we give those people control, or the more that those people's influence results in good people making bad decisions, the closer we get to another collapse. Now, this is not a doom and gloom thing. It's not like every race somebody is interfering in every single series. Some series are worse than others. Some series, it doesn't happen at all. Like I said, there are the really good owners, the really good promoters out there who understand that you build the team, you build the processes, you do all of this ahead of time so that by the time you get to the racetrack, their job is done. They are essentially PR at that point, and they leave everything to the people who they've hired to do their jobs the way they're supposed to. And only in an extreme emergency, if the race officials feel that something is unsafe and the track owner doesn't want to make that change, owner promoter is going to have to get involved. If a major sponsor is making a spectacle of themselves trying to demand special treatment and they are not listening to the race team, the owner might have to get involved. But as long as the owner and the promoter have done their job, once the racing starts, their job is done. They are just taking notes, they're observing, and they're deciding any changes that have to get made for the next event, which I'm sure they're already well into. Have you experienced promoters and series owners interfering in calls? Have you been the victim of it? Have you been somebody who thought that that was happening, but it simply wasn't the case? You learned later? Let me know what you think. Thank you very much for watching. Like, subscribe, do all those good things, comment, and as always, I will see you at the racetrack.